Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Found in Interpretation podcast. Once again, I'm one of your co-hosts, Alain Breton, and I'm here with Brian. How you doing, Brian?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. It's almost the end of the busy season, so we've almost survived.
Yeah.
Kidding.
So we're also here with Corrine McKay. Corrine, how you doing?
I'm fantastic. Thanks so much for inviting me to be on the podcast today.
Right. Well, for those who don't know Corrine, we're going to go quickly through her bio. Corrine is a full-time freelance interpreter since 2002, certified by the American Translators Association for French and English, certified by the U.S. State for Colorado for French court interpreting, holds a Master's of Conference Interpreting at London College. We may know a thing or two about this. Worked exclusively as a translator from 2002 to 2018. Then started a career as an interpreter, passing the court interpreter exam in 2019, earned the MCI in 2021, served on the board of American Translators Association for 7 years, was the ATA president from 2017 to 2019, runs an online training platform, training for translators, and is also the author of How to Succeed as a Freelance Translator, a business guidebook with over 15,000 copies in print.
That's
What
right.
an interesting career.
Breathe, Alain, breathe.
Well, I want to get to the even more interesting part, which is the discussion, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was a quick intro. So, yeah, welcome, Corinne. You're our first American interpreter on Founded Interpretation. So, congratulations
fantastic.
on that.
Right. I mean, I consider myself like a little bit of an honorary Canadian because I did go to Glendon and we actually spend almost a month every summer in Canada. But yes, I'm for real American and I'm a dual Swiss citizen, actually.
Oh, wow. So you're like us because we are.
Is that where your French comes from?
No, not at all. I married a Swiss guy who only speaks English.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So is everything neutral at home? Just like interpreters are always neutral in the booth? Like,
Yes, exactly. No conflict on the home front because we're
Never.
a neutral country. Yeah,
That's right.
exactly. Totally.
There's a lot of no comments.
Exactly.
So let's launch into the first set of questions that I don't have anything prepared, but I just want to know, like for those who are from Canada or other places in the world, what is the ATA, the American Translators Association, and what's the benefit of it? Seeing as you've been like interim president and then full-time president, I think you're best suited to fill us in.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'm a big proponent of professional associations in general. So when I started out in 2002, I had a master's degree in French literature and a baby, and who's now 22. And so really,
Still a baby.
Which one was the
Right.
hardest?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So really, I started out just thinking I'd like to find a job where I could work from home and use French. What could I do? And so I was a high school teacher before my daughter was born. And on my first day that I thought of myself as a freelance translator, I sat there with my daughter at that time was still small enough that she could sleep on my lap. So she was asleep on my lap, and I started calling translation companies in Colorado on the phone and asking, how do I find work with you? And I pretty quickly found the Colorado Translators Association. So I live in the U.S. state of Colorado, which is in the Rocky Mountains in the western United States. Like if you draw a line down from Calgary, you would hit me eventually. So in terms of Canada, that's where I am, is due south of Calgary. So I pretty quickly found the Colorado Translators Association and then the American Translators Association. So ATA is, I think, probably the largest translators and interpreters association, at least in the Western world. I think they're probably the associations in China are now larger, but ATA now has about 7,000, 8,000 members. Anyone in any country in the world can be a member of ATA. And unlike a lot of the Canadian associations like OTAC, it's not a certified translators association. Anyone with, I think they say, an interest in translation or interpreting as a professional or academic pursuit can join.
It's
So
quite wide.
yeah. So I think you can go back and forth on what are the advantages and disadvantages of the sort of restrictive versus open systems. But ATA is an open association. It's really open to anybody. And so I think really for me, kind of the launch pad of starting a real career as a freelancer was to join those associations and meet established translators and interpreters and kind of learn like how to do this. Because I think for most of us, the real struggle is how do you run a business, right? Like the language part, we know how to do because either we went to school for it or it's something that we've always loved or, whatever. Like I always say, if you meet a freelancer who says, the business part is so simple, it's the language part that's really hard, like send them to me because they would be the first person who ever said that. Really?
Well, it's just about invoicing and paying, that's it, and doing your taxes once a year. It's so simple.
Right. So I think, the example that I always give people is the first translation job that I ever did that was some minimum charge, like birth certificate or something. They said, send us your invoice. And I actually called my husband at work and said, what do you think that means? Do I just write on a Word document, like pay me $75 or whatever my, minimum charge was at that point? I mean, we laugh now, but how would you know? And I think, like we all come to freelancing with different advantages and disadvantages. Like I always say, an advantage I think I had was I kind of had the can-do spirit. Like I'm not easily discouraged. And also I think I have a decent attitude about money. But there is no entrepreneurial vein in my family. Like both of my parents had traditional jobs. They're both scientists. They're not language people. They had traditional jobs their whole careers. And I think you talk to some people who, like I talked to a freelancer the other day who said, oh, my parents are both musicians and they, did freelance work and ran a music school out of our house. And so I always kind of knew you could like make it without an employer. And for me, I had never really experienced that. So
Yeah, it
yeah.
could be scary for some people who they become in-house translators, for example, and then they get a salary, whereas
Right.
we're kind of fighting for the next contract, I guess. And
Totally.
yeah, my mom was like kind of the same. She's like, why are you going into freelance work? Like you're not going to make any money with this. And
Right.
I'm like, well, no, because I was a full-time translator before, and I thought like instead of putting all of my eggs in one basket, I've got multiple eggs in multiple baskets. So like I
Exactly.
lose one client, another one comes, or you get another one, and it's very exciting to be an
Totally.
entrepreneur. Yeah.
But I'm going to ask, is it in your case, when you said that you started this freelance journey when your child was born, so in the end, do you think it was you or the circumstances that led you to become freelance?
Oh my gosh, great question. And both. So I think it was something that being a freelancer was something that always interested me. Like my husband's sister is a web designer. And at the time she was a freelancer. And I would always talk to her and think, oh my gosh, that sounds so cool to be able to like make your own schedule, decide you're going to take a big chunk of time off, go like work up from the beach in Thailand. Like she would do all of these cool things that, when like I was a teacher, like I said, I was a teacher before I was a translator. And that's a job where you get a lot of vacation, but you're very locked in. Like I used to tell people, literally I have to call in late if I'm going to be 3 minutes late to work because the first period of the day where we take attendance lasts for 3 minutes. So I have to call them and tell them if I'm going to be 3 minutes late to work.
Yeah.
So I had always been interested. But then I think to your point, Alain, when I was in my first few years of freelancing, so my first year as a freelancer, I made $9,000 And I was actually thrilled with that because my real fear was that I would make $0,000, right? It would be like throwing a birthday party that no one came to. And you're totally correct that when I thought like, this is so hard and I don't know what to do. And is this going to work out? Like I would look at my tiny daughter and think, well, the other choice is that I have to go back to a full-time job and put her in full-time childcare, which in the US is a huge commitment because you pay for it yourself. even if it's what you want to do, we have really no government-supported childcare, and so you pay for it yourself, and it's incredibly expensive. And so you're right that like really she was my motivation, that I would think like I have to make this work because I want to have more time with her when she's little, which is now something that I'm very, very glad that I did.
And just one quick one just before
hmm
Brian, just because I want to stay on that topic as well.
hmm
So because in the beginning you said that you contacted in Colorado some translating companies.
That's right.
In your language combination was French and English. Are you saying that there's a French market in Colorado, or is this for the whole U.S.?
Well, sort of. So, um, I guess there's a couple of ways to answer that question. There are a bunch of translation companies here in Colorado that do written translation work for really clients all over the world. So, for example, one of my first real like ongoing translation gigs with a translation company in Colorado is that they had a large contract with a big credit card company. That so you guys probably know, like if you go on a trip to another country and something of yours gets stolen or whatever, you file a police report there, and then so that you can claim it on your credit card insurance, you have to file a claim back in the US. So one of my first ongoing translation jobs was translating police reports from people who had gone to French speaking countries and like their expensive camera got stolen and they want to claim it on their credit card insurance. So you have to translate that. So that would be an example of something that I did, was working for translation companies that do work for people, you know, all over the world, and certainly all over the US. And then I was always really interested in interpreting, but at that time, remote interpreting was not much of a thing at all. Like, I guess phone interpreting maybe existed in the early 2000s, but certainly what we would now call remote interpreting did not. So I did a little bit of, I guess, what we would now call community interpreting, but really kind of gave it up because I couldn't figure out how to make it work schedule wise, because my husband's not a freelancer. He has a salaried job. And, you know, as all of us know, interpreting is a lot less predictable than translation. Like if you're in an assignment that runs over, you can't really tell them like I have to log off because I have to go pick my kids up.
Yeah,
You know, you
yeah.
you have
So
to
you
be there.
don't?
Yeah. You have to be there. You have to be there when they need you.
So
So
you have to tell them, listen, I have another assignment and I got to connect into the next Zoom. That's
right,
the trick.
right. Yeah, no, that definitely is true now. But yeah, and so I was always interested in interpreting, but I just couldn't make it work logistically at that time.
Yeah. No, I have a question. Like in this, I'll take an example from the U.S., like the AFL-CIO. That's like an umbrella organization for all of the unions that are part
Mhm.
of in the United States. Is the ATA kind of the same thing, where it's like the umbrella organization for all the state associations, or is it
Oh,
independent?
yeah, sort of. So ATA does have a ton of chapters, but the chapters choose to be members of it. ATA doesn't go say, like, you need to form a chapter in, you know, Utah or whatever.
Sorry,
So,
a chapter is a branch? Sorry, my
right,
lack of
exactly.
terminology. Okay.
So, yeah, exactly. So there are, I guess ATA calls them chapters, but you could call them branches of ATA that are mostly specific to states. So the one I'm in is CETA, Colorado Interpreters and Translators Association. But then there are some that are multi-state. Like there's MICATA, the Mid-America chapter of ATA that covers like
Uh,
Kansas, Missouri, and something else. Maybe other states too. So yeah, ATA chapters could be state specific or region specific. And for your people who might be beginning translators or interpreters, joining a local chapter of ATA is like a lot more doable because the dues are maybe 40 or 50 US dollars a year, as compared to big ATA dues, which are, I think, close to 300, around 300 US dollars a year. And if you're just starting out, or if you're in the idea stage, like 300 US dollars is a pretty big commitment if you're not making a ton of money, or if you don't know if you want to do this, but you could probably afford $40. And then
But people join associations for what reason? They join to find clients or to get some extra training? to do networking?
Keep going. You got it.
All right.
Yes. All of the above.
Because,
So I
for
think,
instance, I think of, no, so sorry, but just because I think of Atiak, for instance. Atiak has, if when you're a member, you have a platform, and there are regular online training sessions that are live.
Yep.
We don't really find that for interpreters because, interpreters are very few. But in the associations that you're describing, do they offer the same sort of services?
Exactly. So the reasons that you would join is, I think, first of all, because it gives you credibility as a serious professional. Like, I think when you're marketing to clients, that seeing that you're a member of a professional association shows like this person is willing to invest some time and money in establishing a professional reputation. They have a network of colleagues. I think it speaks well of you as a professional. And then exactly like you said, Anna, it gives you access to training. Like ATA has a big conference every year. It just happened in Portland, Oregon in October with 1,200 people. And it's going to be in Boston in 2025.
Right next door.
Yeah. So you East Coasters should totally come. And it's one of the larger translator and interpreter events that exist. So I think all of those reasons. And then some professional associations have an outward-facing website and some don't. ATA does. So you get a listing in the ATA directory and clients can find you there. So I would say pretty much every year that I've been an ATA member, I've gotten at least enough work from the ATA directory that it's paid for my ATA membership. And especially now that I have translator and interpreter certification, if people are looking for someone who does both, who interprets and translates, it's a small number of people. And so that's particular, at least in the US, it's not that common for people to do both. And so that's even more of an advantage.
And you can also join as an association too, right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So you can do a triple whammy if you want to.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. Yeah, and I went to one of the ATA annual meetings when it was in Chicago. So I think it was maybe 2012, 2013 or so.
You should totally come to Boston.
Yeah, I had a great time.
Hey, Brian, you feel like a drive?
Yeah, why not, eh? The PD sessions were really interesting, and there's also the booths with all the vendors and stuff. So it's a really cool one, and I'd love to go to Boston.
It's a good event.
Would you say that this association is more focused on Spanish English? Because I guess the market for Spanish must be huge in the United States.
Focused on not necessarily like the ATA Spanish. Once you're in ATA, you can join what are called divisions, which basically is for like a language or a specialization. So the ATA Spanish division is always the largest, but I would not say that that the conference has a particular Spanish focus, although you're exactly right, Alain, that Spanish is like the big other language in the US.
Yeah, no, for sure. And how does is there a lot of work in Spanish? Because in Canada, there's two official languages, so almost everything has to happen at least in English, French.
Yeah.
If it's a national event, or even like a multi-provincial event with Quebec involved, and so we almost automatically have to have interpreters for events. Is there the same, like, how does it work in a country where English is the official language and there's not much, like, I find that there's less openness to other languages.
So it's a little weird. So first of all, if I can correct you, one of the things that's kind of peculiar, the US doesn't have an official language.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the US has, which becomes important for lots of reasons, that the US legally has no official language. So, yeah. So a lot of people don't know that.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, so that's the question. So
here we go.
Right, exactly. So
that's why we have this podcast. We're going to make it interesting.
Right. Yeah. So on the one hand, obviously I do a lot of remote interpreting for Canada. And in one sense, you have this like real, mandate to include French. And even sometimes for reasons that like to a non-Canadian are a little bit hard to understand. When people say like, well, maybe there's English speakers who want to work on their French. And so they would, like our board of directors is primarily English speakers, but maybe there's people who want to work on their French. So let's have interpreters so they can listen to them if they feel like it. But
Okay.
Wow.
but in the US, for example, you go into any courthouse. So I do court interpreting also, so I'll give that as an example. You go into any courthouse in the US, and there is a poster that says, like, in 25 different languages, if you can't communicate in English, it is your right to have an interpreter provided at no cost.
Okay.
So if you are in court in the US, at least for a criminal proceeding, whether or not you're a US citizen, whether or not you're in the US lawfully, you are provided with an interpreter that the US government pays for, or the state government pays for. So
Is that more on the state level or federal level, or it doesn't matter?
It doesn't really matter. So just as an example, the other day I translated a set of divorce papers from Switzerland that were in French. And it says in French, if you can't communicate in French, bring an interpreter to the hearing. That's it.
Wow.
And like, when I've asked people who live in some European countries, even, Germany, like big, well-funded places, what happens to people if they go to the hospital in Germany and they don't speak German? They're like, I don't really know. Whereas here in the US, because of the no official language thing, at least, so the rule here is that any court or any legal or medical issue which receives any federal funding, and that's a pretty broad definition. For example, if it's a hospital that is enrolled in the US Medicare program, which is how people over 65 get health insurance in the US, that is considered receiving federal funding, and they have to provide interpreters at their expense for anyone who doesn't speak English. So it's sort of a weird system that in the US, like you said, Brian, I think America is rightly perceived as a pretty xenophobic place where people are not particularly interested in, providing interpreters for people who don't speak English, things like that. But on the other hand, we have this very broad legal obligation to provide interpreters because we, on paper, don't have an official language. And so there's this whole thing of receiving federal funding and having to provide an interpreter.
So it's kind of, I wouldn't say ironic, but surprising at least, that the lack of structure in terms of official language allows, in a way, a market to flourish.
Totally.
By making it less restrictive,
Totally.
you're allowing more possibilities when it comes to other languages, and the responsibility is sort of shared between different institutions, federal, state, rather, hospitals, or you name it. So it's very interesting.
Yep. Right. And that even applies to people who are in the US without documentation. Like in most court proceedings, unless you're there for an immigration-related purpose, they're not allowed to ask if you're a citizen. And so there are people who, I assume that I interpret quite a bit for people who are in the US on an undocumented basis, and still, they get a publicly funded interpreter for their court proceeding.
What countries would the French-speaking people be from? Would they be more African or Haiti or?
Almost exclusively West Africa. Once in a while, I'll interpret for a Haitian person, and I'm not sure whether that's because there aren't that many Haitians in Colorado or because they prefer a Creole interpreter, which they can choose. But almost exclusively French-speaking West Africa. Once in a great while, I'll interpret for a European French speaker. I don't think I've ever interpreted in Colorado for a Canadian, but almost exclusively Francophone West Africa.
Okay.
Wow. How do you deal with accents and expressions and everything? Did your ear got used to it?
Well, it's interesting. So I find, as a rule, African French speakers quite easy to understand. Like that.
Unlike Quebecois?
Well, so the crazy thing, I don't know whether it's for me, like too much time spent in Canada or whatever. I have had multiple African French speakers ask me if I'm Canadian. Like say, oh, where did you learn French? Are you Canadian? And I always feel like, no, like God help you when you get when you get a real Canadian French interpreter, you won't be able to understand them at all. So I find, sort of like when I talk to Swiss French speakers, that I think I find Swiss and African French to be, I hate the word like I hate when people say they don't have an accent, like everyone does, everyone's got an accent of some sort. But no, but I think in general, African French, I find quite easy to understand. People don't tend to speak super quickly. There aren't a ton of regionalisms. I like it.
So going back to your first American guest on Found in Interpretation, I have so I gotta ask all these macro questions.
Ask the American anything. Yeah, here we go.
Yes, tell us everything about America.
Right.
What happens south of the border?
I don't understand a lot of it either, but go ahead. We'll try to talk it through.
Well, one of my questions is, say, when we switched governments, on a federal level from conservative to liberal, usually, or back and forth, usually that affects our business in a way. There's a lot of times when you're doing, when you do conferences for Indigenous, environmental groups, or LGBT community, and those kinds of things, like non-for-profit, they're not necessarily in the budget or as important for some governments than others. We lost a lot of business when Harper got elected as a conservative, because he cut a lot of funding out of rights and democracy and environment and Indigenous and non-for-profits, amongst others. So we saw a big shift in our jobs, and we had to head towards more corporate stuff and that kind of thing. And those are the kinds of things that are never going to come back, unfortunately. And then with Trudeau, I think he was more let's be more open to the French language, and let's introduce some things get funding for French-speaking Canadian radio stations, that kind of thing.
Oh, cool.
Do you see that? If between when you switch from Democrats to Republicans, is there that kind of dynamic too in terms of languages?
No, but so no, not really.
No, okay.
No, not really. But I think the big thing that is sort of hanging out there is that every once in a while, there is an uprising of support in the U.S. for English-only movements to, for example, declare that English is the official language of the U.S. And I think that so far, we haven't seen a whole lot of momentum behind that. But just for the first time, someone asked me the other day, when we have the administration change to Trump, which is coming in 1 month, the inauguration is January 20th, if there were a significant amount of support for this English-only idea, could that completely kill the federal funding for, court and medical interpreting, for example? And I think, that's a big undertaking because...
Okay, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, would it be the opposite? Because now that you have a structure for English, then all the services must be in English. Then if the person cannot speak English, it can't magically become an English speaker, then you'll need an interpreter.
Right, exactly. So, to directly answer your question, no, I think when we have administration turnovers in the U.S., there has historically not been a big change in the language services market. But I think, Trump's second term is going to be, a really different situation in the U.S., and we'll see what happens with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think, the U.S., to me, as someone who spends a fair bit of time in Europe and Canada and other places, the U.S. is sort of an interesting situation that in a way, we have this huge amount of funding for interpreting and for, English as a second language classes in school. When my daughter was in elementary school, her school had a high percentage of kids who English was not their first language. And there's a ton of government funding for things like that. But I think, we'll see how that fares after the turnover to the Trump administration, which is coming in, 33 days now.
Would you be able to give a brief summary of your book? I'm really curious. I haven't read it, but
totally.
I want to maybe buy a copy and see if
Yeah.
I'm missing something.
So don't get it yet.
For the
Don't-
holidays. It's
Yeah.
not Christmas yet.
Oh,
You can
wait,
get it.
don't get it yet.
light reading. Yeah, no, don't buy it yet, and here's why. So, When I first started translating, when I first started freelancing, I wrote the first edition of that book in 2006.
Oh, wow.
Largely, yeah. And now I look back and think, like, what the heck did I know about freelancing? Like, I was still, an infant freelancer at that time. But I think what I thought that was correct was, like, if I beat my head against all of these walls, like, how do you find clients? How do you invoice them? How do you get them to pay you if they're not in the US? How do you decide on a specialization? Then surely there are other people out there who have those questions too. And it turned out I was right. So I did the first edition in 2006, then a second edition, maybe 2010, and then the third edition is now almost 10 years old. But why you shouldn't buy it is
Is it
because,
fourth edition?
because I have two new books in the works.
Okay.
So I wrote an interpreting companion to that book that is called Getting Started as a Freelance Interpreter. I sort of didn't feel that I knew enough yet to call it How to Succeed as a Freelance Interpreter, because I've only been doing interpreting, 5 years myself, not that long. So I called it Getting Started as a Freelance Interpreter, and that my publisher already has the manuscript, and it's going to come out in May, hopefully. But my next project after the holidays is to do, to my shock and horror, a 20th anniversary edition of How to Succeed as a Freelance Translator, because the first edition came out in 06. So basically, I went through the first edition. I really just made a list of, like, everything that all of the dilemmas that I had to solve in my first year or two as a freelancer, all of the things that I just told you. Where do you find your first clients? How do you market to them? How do you decide how much to charge? How do you get paid? How do you make a budget for your freelance business? How do you decide on specializations? What technology do you need? How do you decide on working from home versus, I rent an office outside my house because I hate working from home, all of that stuff. So yeah, stay tuned for Getting Started as a Freelance Interpreter in May. And then the next thing on my list is 20th anniversary edition of How to Succeed as a Freelance Translator.
Do you is it more marketed to Americans because of the different rules and regulations in their reality, or this is also good for our Canadian audience?
Yeah, I've had lots of international purchasers of it, and I tried to make it, obviously things like taxes and incorporating, I only know the US system, but I think that the general concept, for example, that as a freelancer, you have to save for taxes, right? Unless you want
Yes.
a big, nasty surprise at the end of the year. Pretty much every country on earth, you have to either pay incrementally or, save up that big amount for the end of the year. So I've had a lot of international buyers, and I don't believe that anyone has ever referred to it as, like, US specific. Or if you look at the Amazon reviews, I don't think anyone has ever said, like, oh, this didn't apply to me because I'm not American.
Yeah, no, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, so if the IRS or the equivalent in Canada, the CRA, are listening, please know that we pay our taxes.
Yes. I pay taxes. Even every once in a while, I have a weird thing where a client will pay me in cash. Like, I have a, local client who needs a birth certificate translation, and they just come and hand me $100. I even pay taxes on that. Don't come
Yeah,
after any of us.
absolutely.
Translators and interpreters are very honest people.
That's right.
Totally.
But yeah, no,
we don't do money laundering. We just interpret for those who do money
Yes,
laundering, like Louis
right.
said last week.
That's right.
Yes.
And it's confidential, so
Yeah, exactly.
our lips are sealed. But yeah, that's awesome that you're doing this book, because, like, I didn't have anything like that, and it's so cool also because I was in the era of looking through the yellow pages to find clients, and, like, that move from the yellow pages to, like, looking at websites to now social media
Totally.
and AI, like, it's just like such a difference. So I'm glad that, like, you're updating it to 20th cent, like,
Yep.
20 years later kind of
Yep,
version. 'Cause
exactly.
it's so different now, especially after COVID, with all the Zoom calls and more virtual
Big
meetings
time.
and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
But now that you also do work with Canadian agencies and work between French and English in Canada, the Canadian dollar today hits 68 or 69 cents for a dollar. So that must hurt.
Yeah, I guess
Don't
I'm
sugarcoat it.
no, it's true. I mean, I'm fortunate in, well, first of all, I think because my husband and I guess for the past 2 years have spent the whole month of July in Canada. I have the advantage that I get to go spend in Canadian dollars.
Oh, that's good.
Some,
Yeah.
right, at least some of the time. And I think in general, for me, the Canadian conference interpreting market pays a lot more than the US market does. And so I sort of consider like it comes out at least even anyway, and I'm probably still ahead. I mean, you're right that every time a client just paid me the other day, and every time I see the transaction report, I'm like, gosh, I can't believe this. Like I thought I thought it was bad when it was $1.30, and now it's like $1.46,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But on the other hand, just, I mean, and I guess I would say more, maybe for your listeners or viewers who work across countries, what I see as a bigger difference between the US and Canadian markets is the emphasis on working conditions in Canada. So, like, when I get contacted a lot of the time by US interpreting agencies, they will ask, for example, would you work up to 2 hours alone on yeah, right. Like, well, we know that usually people don't do more than an hour alone, but the meeting's only going to be an hour and 40 minutes. Could you do that?
Only.
Or which I absolutely will not do, or there's more pressure to, for example, charge by the hour. Whereas I find, in that way kind of prefer working for Canadian clients because it's just a given that you get a half day minimum and that they will always hire a second interpreter if it's more than an hour. And sometimes even if it's not, that I think
And this is in the conference market, right?
Or remote simultaneous. I would say most of the work that I do for Canada isn't actual conferences, it's business meetings and things like that.
No, what I'm saying is when the agencies contact you to offer you an hourly rate or like a 2-hour solo.
Yeah, that's right.
This is in the what we call the conference
yes,
simultaneous
it's
interpretation.
what you guys would call conferences. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Why do you think it's that?
A few reasons. I think the US, for better or worse, has a little bit more of the like anyone can do it spirit. There are only 2 IE approved conference interpreting programs in the US, Middlebury Institute at Monterey in California and the University of Maryland in Maryland. And actually, I should correct myself. Those are the only 2 that offer French. There may be other ones that I didn't look at that only do Spanish. But those are the only 2 that offer French. So it's quite uncommon to have a conference interpreting master's, whereas in Canada, you at least have Glendon and Ottawa that I think are also more affordable and just it's more common for people to do it. So, yeah. And so, I don't know. That's something that I have sort of thought about a lot, and I'm not sure that I have a real answer to it. But I also think, I hate to blame our own people, but when you think, how do working conditions for translators and interpreters get eroded? It's because people agree to them. When I think like when I first started out as a translator, even the, huge agencies in the US paid like 10 to 12 cents a word for French to English, which is, it's okay money, like it's not great, but it's not horrible. You can live on that if you focus on, specializations where you can get faster and more efficient. And I would say now those rates have been cut at least in half and maybe lower. So I don't really translate for agencies
because of technology.
Well, no, because people say yes.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean,
Right.
people. Well, what I'm saying is now people say yes also because maybe they can use a ChatGPT or a DeepL or whatever to work faster, and then I can become more productive or something. Isn't that it? Or
But
suddenly people didn't just turn around and start cutting their own rates. There must be a reason behind.
Well, but that phenomenon existed way before ChatGPT. And honestly, I think it's just because you really can't blame agencies for thinking, well, if we're getting these people to do it for 10 cents, let's try 9.5.
Okay.
And the translator says, it's only half a cent. like, okay,
As if inflation doesn't go up.
right, exactly. That I just find that interpreters and translators in Canada have a way different mindset than Americans about working conditions and about their own value. Because I think really, how did that happen in the US? Because translators and interpreters said yes to it.
And I find that the associations in Canada are a lot more about regulations and that kind of
Yes.
thing, and they're very based on like IEC standards and that kind of thing. Whereas
Absolutely.
I feel like in the States it's a little bit more like Wild Wild West. Like, let's see what we can get and let's let the
Completely.
market dictate our prices and our rates and our working conditions.
Yeah,
But it
completely.
could also be because of supply and demand. I mean, in Canada, there's a shortage of interpreters. And the demand is so big in Canada because of the official language situation,
Right.
because the population is getting bigger. And Glendon barely has, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, barely, and Ottawa, the same situation. Like, very few people graduate from, let's take interpretation as an example, but translation is also very small. Ottawa
Mhm.
just, last year, I think, they shut down their translation department in Ottawa. So, Glendon
And
is
my
facing
year at
its own little
Glendon was
troubles.
6 people in French.
Did they all graduate that year?
I'm not sure.
Because
I
in
don't
my
think
in my
No,
year,
no, not everyone
we were
passed the
3.
exit
I didn't.
exams on the
Yeah,
first try.
I
Yeah.
didn't write the exit,
Yeah.
or I
No,
didn't
and
sit
not
the exit
everybody
exam.
passed the exit exams on the first try. I don't think that ever happens at Glendon, that everyone passes the exit exams on the first try.
well, it wasn't in my cohort either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So you're right.
So,
I mean, even with those
so,
programs, they're not
uh,
producing that many people.
so in our case, I mean, I can say no to a rate that is not up to what I think I should get,
Yeah,
because I know that somebody else is going to offer me the rate that I should get.
exactly.
But if I was desperate for work, who knows how I would react?
Right.
There may be also this supply and demand dynamic.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
I think you get what you get, right? And you don't get upset if you're asking for 9 cents, then like that's what you're gonna get probably not as good of a result as someone who's getting 14 cents on a regular basis. I'm just using those two numbers as a general example, but I always,
Mhm.
like, when I started my company, I always said I don't want to open up a fire hall. Like, I don't want to be setting
Yes.
fires left, right, and center because I'm hiring crappy people who are going to do crappy work.
And
I
then the
want to,
client complains and wants their money back. And
yeah,
right, exactly. It
like
just creates more hassle for you in the end.
absolutely. I find that like one complaint, it takes about 2 weeks for like it all to be resolved. And like that's 2 weeks that I don't want to spend doing that. I'd rather be
Yes.
growing my business than putting out fires. So that's why my philosophy is always like I'm not a fire hall. Like I want to hire the
Mhm.
best, and I'm not going to undercut uh, just to make the client happy, or just to say, yeah, I'll do it for like another, you know, 8 cents or 7 cents, and like then where's the bottom, right? Like,
Right.
yeah,
Yep, exactly.
Well, but 9 cents in the US is like $20 Canadian now.
that's right.
Right. You can't compare the two because now at this exchange rate.
It's like a grape and a watermelon. You can't.
Yes.
It's not apples and oranges anymore.
Totally. Totally.
I'm thinking about visiting my family in the States, and when I saw that this morning, I was like, oh my, should I buy some Canadian currency now just to make sure that when we get to 50 cents?
I know.
So, Corinne, which one do you prefer, translation or interpretation?
I mean, that's like asking people to choose between their 2 children, right? So, so I will say that I love interpreting. I enjoy, I mean, everything you guys enjoy, the live aspect, feeling that this is really meaningful. And while people are listening to you live, you get to interpret about such interesting things. Um, so I think, I mean, the thing that I would say is that I think interpreting has made me a better translator, and translating has made me a better interpreter. I think they're very complementary, and I really enjoy still doing both. I mean, the one thing that I will say that I think is so, for me, a real something I like emotionally about interpreting is when it's done, it's done. Like,
Mhm.
you have an assignment, and whether it went well or whether it went poorly, it's over and there's nothing that you can do about it. Whereas when you do a translation and the client is coming back to you, 3 months later being like, we have another question. Could you change this? Actually, we think that this would be a better word. Translations kind of haunt you forever or can, haunt
Like
you.
anything printed. Like anything printed.
Yes,
Yeah,
like anything.
they know at you back here, right?
Right.
Like
And then
behind.
because it's in print, anyone who wants to can give their opinion about the quality or the word choice, or, I think all of us have had that experience of the, translation clients, semi-English speaking or semi-French speaking staff who want to give input on your translation. And so I would say, like, the thing that I really love about translation is sitting there trying to think of exactly the right expression. Like the other day, I was doing a translation that was sort of a conversational tone, and I used the expression, I think in French, it was either par contre or au contraire. And in English, I said on the flip side. And the editor came back and said, I don't know that I've ever read a translation into English where the translator used the expression on the flip side. So to me, there's like that aspect that you go like, yeah, like I really nailed it on that one. So I love that aspect of translation. But one thing I really love about interpreting is like you prepare, you show up, and then it's done. No matter how it went, it's over. And I really like that more sort of compartmentalized aspect of it. And you're not like waking up at 3 a.m. thinking like, oh no, I should have said this.
So we're getting now to the end of the podcast, but I do have one last question for you. Because you wrote a book on advice and you're part of association and everything. What is a piece of advice that you would give to a young translator or interpreter who's just starting these days?
Mm-hmm. So one thing, and this is actually something that Brian and I have talked about before, that despite all of the changes in the language professions, number one, I would say so I have a 22-year-old daughter who is soon going to be in the position of choosing her career. And if she wanted to be a translator or interpreter, I would actually feel very positive about that. And I would encourage her or any of her same age friends to do it. Like she actually has a friend who grew up bilingual in Japanese and is doing a Japanese literature master's degree now. And I even said to her, like, when you have to figure out how to make money with that, you come talk to me. And we'll talk about
I wrote a book.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You know someone who wrote a book on the topic. So number one, I would say that I still see a very bright future for the translation and interpreting professions, despite the fact that both of those professions look way, way different than when I started in 2002. And I think we all underestimate the amount of marketing that it takes to develop a truly viable freelance business. So, when I think like my goal now is to earn the freelance equivalent of a 6-figure salaried job. So you have to make a lot. If you want to end up with in your pocket what you would be earning if you had a 6-figure salary job, you have to make a lot. It takes a lot more work than you wish it did. I think we all have this fantasy that we're going to send out 3 CVs and then clients are going to be sort of like beating a path to our door with
please let us hire you.
Yes, exactly. Where have you been all your life? All of our lives. And so I think, for example, my first year as a freelance translator, I applied to more than 400 translation companies, and it still took about 1.5 years until I had what I would consider full-time work. And when I finished the Glendon program, the actual marketing was a lot easier because I think when you have a master's in conference interpreting, that's sort of an automatic filter, that you can start applying to agencies or direct clients who will only consider people with an MCI, and that is not that many people, but it still took 1.5 years.
Yep.
So my goal when I finished the Glendon program was to be half translation and half interpreting. At some point, my goal was more like 2 years after I finished Glendon, and I think it took 1.5 years to do that. But I think You really have to stick with it for the long haul. Like we all have that fantasy, like, oh, I'm going to start sending out some CVs and in 3 months, I'm going to have all of this lucrative, high paying work. And I think for people who have like a secret sauce, that could be true. Like I have a couple freelance translation colleagues who had science PhDs before they were translators. And for them, that really is true because they can go look for high paying direct clients like right out of the gate. But I would just say for perspective, I've kind of started from scratch twice, once as a translator and once as an interpreter. And interpreting was a lot less actual marketing work, but it still took about 1.5 years out of Glendon until I thought like, okay, now I have this sort of stable of regular clients that they're coming to me instead of me going to them. So maybe that helps.
That's why these programs like Glendon, fingers crossed, and Ottawa, that's going on, and now the micro program with Louis in Quebec City.
Yeah.
These programs are very, very important for our profession.
Mhm.
All right. On that note, we're being very bullish for 2025. I'm
Yes.
happy to hear that.
Yep.
It's very important.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Onward.
Because
I'm
people are
excited.
sometimes,
Yeah.
sometimes you read things and people are sometimes scared what is going on with technology. That's completely normal.
It is
But
scary.
it's also
it is scary.
but at the same time, it's also good to have a positive mindset.
Yep.
And to adapt to change and feel that our profession is not as endangered as we thought it would be.
Totally.
Absolutely.
So
But thanks,
okay,
Corinne.
thank you so much, Corinne.
Oh,
Brian,
thank you guys. This
you want
was
to have
really
the last
fun.
word?
I really
No,
enjoyed it.
I'll let you
All right.
finish things, but I just wanted to thank Corinne as well. It's been awesome to see you again and
Yeah,
to
you
chat.
too.
And
Thanks.
hopefully we'll do it again soon. And I'm looking
Yeah.
forward. Let me know when the 20th anniversary book is out.
Maybe I can be on again in early 2026 when it comes out.
Absolutely, come back.
Yeah,
You're
that'd be
more than
fun.
welcome.
That'd be
I
fun.
want a signed copy in Boston.
There you
Yes,
go.
Yes.
We got a date in Boston.
Totally.
All right, everyone. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again for another episode of Found Your Interpretation podcast. Good night and good luck.